11 o'clock, we will get started. We've got our panelists all here. We have our moderator, Barb. Welcome everyone from British Columbia, Alberta, across the country to join us for part 2 of the Wines of British Columbia virtual 2020 Vintage Media Preview. I'm Laura Kittmer, for those of you I've not met before, Communications Director of Wine Growers British Columbia, and I'm joined here again today with our moderator and Master of Wine, Barb Philip. Last week, we spoke with winemakers in the Okanagan Valley, and today we're thrilled to welcome our panel of winemakers from the Fraser Valley, Kootenays, and Lillooet to discuss the 2020 vintage in these exciting wine growing regions. So before we introduce the panel, a little bit of housekeeping while everyone logs in. So in the chat box, we're just uploading a link now to the 2020 vintage report. So feel free to download and refer to this at your leisure. And if you haven't already downloaded the Wines of BC Explorer app, we have also provided a link to the App Store and to the desktop version in the chat box. So what we've done is created a list on the app under wines called Vintage 2020 Media Preview. And there you will find all of our panelists' contact information, websites, and tech sheets for the wines that they have selected to discuss today. So please take a moment, if you haven't already, download the app. It's a fantastic tool with all of our wineries and wines across the province listed on it. So a good back pocket guide to BC wine. And also just a reminder, the webinar today will be recorded and a link will be made available on WineBC and on our YouTube page. And we have 45 minutes for the discussion today. So to keep us on time, we'll be offering a Q&A at the end of the discussion. So while the chat box is open, and feel free if you have some questions between each other, if you want to chat through the chat box, that's fine. And we just ask that you please use the Q&A box to enter any of your questions or feedback you'd like to share directly with the panels. And Barb will do her best to address all of this. It's much easier for her to filter out the questions for the panelists if they're in the Q&A box. So please use both of those as appropriately. And I think that's all for me. So let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. I will turn it over to our moderator now, Barb Philip. I love your backdrop, and Barb will introduce our panelists and get us on our way.
Thanks, Laura. So excited to be here, and welcome to all of the panelists. Do we have a page with the panelist names? There we go. Welcome to all of you, and Andrew, Wes, and Eckhard will be having some good discussion today, I think. So thank you so much for coming here and representing not only your wineries, but your regions. And I did see a chat come up from Sid Cross, with whom I totally agree when he said, I am pumped to learn more about all of these regions and wineries. And I think that can be said for everybody on the program today. Today, we are going to be talking about the 2020 vintage, of course, but along the lines of what Sid says, you know, most of us are still learning about what to expect from the climates in these emerging regions. We're frankly just not that familiar. We don't have the history of vintages. So I would love it if panelists, when you talk about your wine and you talk about 2020, to really give us some context, give us some perspective. We're still learning about the overall climate, and dare I say, maybe you are too. So we just went briefly by a slide, which was appropriate, sort of encapsulating the vintage in BC, which is fairly hard to do, but there are some truths that really held for most regions in 2020, and that was that it was a slow start. So a relatively slow start, a wetter start than usual in many areas. But then the season caught up, and then by the fall, we had some beautiful weather where the grapes were allowed to ripen, etc. It was also throughout the regions a vintage where smoke was not an issue, either the benefits that it can have for cloud cover or for smoke cover. And also, I think it was a fairly cool vintage for most of the months. But I mean, these are great generalizations. And Andrew, you know, you're sitting there in the Fraser Valley, which doesn't really adhere to most of what happens in the rest of the province. So we really want to hear about you. Look at this beautiful map. And I got this week an exciting email from Wine Growers BC saying that these topographical maps, these new beautiful ones, were available to download. So I encourage everybody to do that. And I think we've got one more slide talking about the climates of these different regions a little bit. So as we know, the coastal mountains really define the two general climatic areas of grape growing in BC. And we're lucky that we're going to be talking about one from the west side and one from the east, or two from the east side. But just to put it a little bit in perspective, and we'll look at some growing degree day slides in a second, the Fraser Valley, as I think most of us know, is significantly different from the Okanagan, from the Kootenays, from Lillooet, in that it's humid. We have a relatively stretched out growing season, but we accumulate heat units at a much lower pace than the interior regions. And in the end, the growing degree days are similar to Vancouver Island, but of course the difference would be we're dealing with a lot more humidity in the Fraser Valley. So what are the advantages of that? What does it mean for certain grape varieties that are going to do well? Andrew is going to give us some insight into that. And then we're going to go all the way into the Kootenays, which will be really exciting. And of course, weather patterns, general climate echoes that of what happens in the Okanagan, but less growing degree days, different challenges to deal with. And I think it's really exciting too, because you know, this is a GI that really declares itself as a cool climate GI. So what does that mean for the wine styles that we're going to be seeing this year and in coming years? And then we'll go to Lillooet, where I was lucky enough to scoot up to this summer when we had when we were allowed to do that. And of course, what do you have now, Eckhard? Something like 30 acres in the whole appellation that's planted. So it's really just an emerging region, but again, intense, but hot in the summer. You know, here we have growing degree days that are sort of in the Oliver or Soyuz level. So let's look at some of the weather data for 2020. So next slide will show the Abbotsford Airport, which I know doesn't sound very romantic for growing grapes, but Andrew, when I looked, this was the closest weather station to your vineyards. So just to have a look. And I think the main thing here is two things. One, significantly lower heat units than you would find in the interior. And also sort of bucking the trend in terms of annual weather patterns for 2020, because it was a slightly overall warmer vintage than the 59-year average. And that was pretty consistent. It's interesting to see, and you'll talk, Andrew, about what happened on a month-to-month basis and what was important for you, but certainly on paper, it looks like a pretty consistent pattern, just a little bit warmer than most years. So let's look at the Kootenays on the next slide. And Creston, this is a pattern, although less dramatic than we saw for regions in the Okanagan Valley, but the pattern is similar. We're starting off, you know, fairly cool, fairly slow, conservatively, then catching up and finishing a little bit warmer and drier in the back end of the season to develop some beautiful ripeness in the grapes. And then we'll look at Lillooet, the warmest of the regions that we're going to talk about today. And this is interesting too. So, you know, Eckhard, you'll have to fill us in on what this meant for you, this pattern overall being slightly cooler, even in, according to this data, even in the last part of August into September, which is actually a different pattern from what we saw in many Okanagan regions. Okay. So let's find out some more about these regions. And, Andrew Etsell, winemaker from Singletree Winery. I'm so excited when I get a chance to try a wine that's all Fraser Valley, because as we know, we've been making wine in Fraser Valley for some time, but it's really just in the last few years that we've started to focus on the elements of terroir there.
It definitely has, it is a lot different, like you've said, from the other growing regions in the interior.
And what would you say are, if you could encapsulate it for us, the key advantages and disadvantages for growing grapes in the Fraser Valley?
I'd say the advantage, we dryland farm here in the Fraser Valley, so we don't have to use irrigation with the clay soils that we have on site. That means that the plants have enough moisture and water to be able to grow and produce the grapes. A disadvantage would also be the humidity that we get from that rain. And for me, it's constantly trying to keep the mildews away from the grapes so that we have a quality product to make the wine with.
And I mean, you're no stranger to agriculture. You understand the land particularly well, and you understand it for other crops and other things. What surprised you the most about growing grapes? I mean, you could say, okay, I know that we've got humidity to deal with, etc. But well, let me ask you, were there any nice surprises when you went to grow grapes?
The nice surprise, our first vintage, which was 2013. Tasting the first wine, which was Zigareba that we made, that we call Ziggy, that I think will be some of the panelists will be trying today, and being able to have a product that we were proud of and being able to have it and being like, you know what, this is an amazing product that will showcase BC with a new region and be able to have a quality wine from the coast was, I think, the biggest surprise for me.
So you weren't even expecting that, and a grape variety that we don't know really that well, which is great because that sets you apart too. So I'm lucky enough to have a glass in front of me, and knowing what I've just learned about the Fraser Valley, about your excitement for Zigarebe, there seems to be, I mean, it's definitely the palate weight. The acid structure is definitely different than what I would expect from an interior region. And is there something viticulturally that makes it particularly adaptive to your water? You know, you say you've got clay-rich soils, you're dealing with the humidity. Is it good? Does it have high disease resistance, or what is particularly good about it in the vineyard?
In the vineyard, it actually is a really early to bud break. So it can be up in the interior, and that since we have vineyards in both locations, I find that it would be susceptible to frost damage sometimes if we have a cooler spring, whereas with the milder spring down here in the Fraser Valley, it's able to get going a little bit earlier. I find my vineyards from the Fraser Valley to the Okanagan, the plants start about 2 to 3 weeks earlier down on the coast. But like you say, with the heat, the plants quickly catch up from the interior and that as the season goes along. So for me with the Ziggy, we don't have to worry about that early frost because we don't have it down here on the coast, and we're able to. It's actually the earliest ripener too. We're usually harvesting that at the end of August or the first week of September.
It's lovely and fresh and bright, and it really suits the day as I'm sitting here in the sunshine with my media friends and tasting it. It's really delicious, and I love it's got an intensity to it, but it's different from intensity that I would expect from some of the more continental regions. And I'm also lucky enough to have the rosé in front of me. And now the rosé, is it a mixture of grapes from the interior and from Fraser Valley?
It is a blend between the two regions. So the Pinot Noir is grown in the Fraser Valley, and the Merlot and the Cab Franc is grown in our Naramata vineyards.
And then the wine is all made here, or do you make it separately and then blend the wine afterward?
So all of our wine, I end up trucking almost all the wine up to the Okanagan, because our main facility is in Naramata. I make about 4,500 to 5,000 liters a year here down on the coast. And so, yeah, it is all brought up, and we'll ferment the wine in separate tanks and then blend it together after doing blending trials.
And then finally, maybe, these two delicious wines. Is there something that, you see does well in the Okanagan, or even not in the Okanagan, but in other regions in the world, that you would really like to try in the Fraser Valley, that on paper, the climate, the soil, the other aspects of terroir seem really suited for, but you haven't had a chance to yet?
Well, we're doing a little bit of a trial right now with early ripening Pinot Noir. We do grow Pinot Noir for our rosés and our sparklings down in the Fraser Valley. It is fairly hard to ripen a good red down here. So that is the new thing for us in the Fraser Valley, is a very early ripening Pinot Noir, and we're going to try our hand at making a Fraser Valley Pinot Noir, and then also our Gruner Veltliner, which is usually a mid to late ripener, but we've had, with some rootstock changes, some very promising vintages over the last couple of years with that.
Fabulous, very interesting. And now you mentioned rootstocks. So your vines are all grafted that you have in the Fraser Valley?
Yes, all of our vines are grafted in our Fraser Valley vineyard, with rootstocks that hopefully push the plants to ripen a couple weeks earlier, since we do have that little bit less growing degree days than the rest. Every day that we can get the plants to ripen and push our season a little bit longer is always a benefit.
Cool. And for the Pinot Noir, is it sparkling, a lot of sparkling wine clones that you've been planting, or where did you look for your material?
We have about 4 different clones on site, all fairly traditional Pinot Noir, the 457, 151s, and then this new variety is coming out of Washington State, and we're just, this year will be the first year that we'll be harvesting that 2-acre block.
Oh, exciting. You might have some Vancouver media just dropping by the crush pad and out of curiosity wanting to try some of that Pinot. I think that would be really cool. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Andrew. I've seen lots of Q&A have come up in the box here, so be prepared to answer lots of questions from the trade near to the end of the seminar. But just to make sure, thanks, Andrew. So just to make sure that we get through all our panelists, and of course, I've got lots of questions too, let's go to the Kootenays. When we talked, was it just yesterday, Wes? So we have Wes Johnson,
yesterday, yeah.
Seems like a long time ago, winemaker at Baillie-Grohman, just outside of Creston in the Kootenays. Welcome and thanks for joining. Yesterday when we talked, you were saying that just skipping ahead to 2021 vintage, you were saying that you were really looking forward to some rain, hopefully, that things have been dry. And did you get some rain this morning? We had tons last night on the coast.
It's trying to. It seems like every time we're getting a little bit of rain, just not really enough though. You know, it's been a really dry season so far. And some of our new vineyards that we just planted last year are actually feeling the effects of it. Hopefully they're just a little bit late to bud, but the rest of the vineyards are all out. So, you know, we're still hopeful, but we'll see how it goes. You know, typically we get a really good snow cap. We get a decent amount of snow here, and then it just extends us through all the way into, you know, July before we actually feel like we have to water. Obviously the young vines for sure we'd be watering, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully we get a big rainfall in the next little while.
I hope so. And were you like many regions in the Okanagan where you did have in 2020 a fairly wet start to the season, in addition to having more of the snow melt?
Yeah. So in 2020, it was a really cool year. We didn't get bud break till May 8th, which is a little bit late for us. You know, it can be late April most of the time. And then also just we had 75 mils in June, which kind of delayed us, and it was quite cool as well. So we were feeling it. It was a really slow start to the season. I don't think we got bloom till July.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, and how long have you been making wine at Baillie-Grohman? About 6 years?
I took over in 2016. Yeah.
Okay. So this will be your 6th coming up, right? It's always hard for me to, yeah. Okay. Something like that. And would you say that you're obviously just still learning, and there isn't that much history for you to look up Farmer's Almanac, etc. But you know, have you seen a pattern? Are there certain things that you can expect year in and year out?
Yeah. Well, we've kind of been thinking that it's a bit of a 10-year cycle. You know, our first harvest was 2009, and we felt like 2020 was very similar to 2010. It was maybe not as a frosty in October as 2010, but 2010 was quite wet, quite cold. And then we started to see a lot of warmer years. We had sort of cycles of 2013, 2015, 2017 being some pretty warm years, and just getting really ripe fruit.
And for you in general, I mean, here you are in this emerging region. You have a chance yourself to really make history. And I do love the focus. I mean, I say there isn't any history, but there's history in other regions in BC that you can look at and learn from and taste the wines. What do you think in the future will set the Kootenays, and particularly around the area of Creston, what do you think will set these wines apart stylistically as we go into the future?
Well, definitely we're seeing really good Pinot Noirs coming out of Creston. You know, we have the ability to get really ripe fruit, and the tannin profile is really nice. And also the acidity left over in it, you know, once it's bottled is tasting delicious. We're also seeing Gewürztraminer grow really well here. You know, we're picking it slightly early because of the amount of aromatics that it can produce. So we're trying to pick just before 23 bricks, and we find that that's sort of the ripeness that gives it the right sort of aromatic profile that we're looking for. For that one, we do a bit of skin contact, and you can tell just by the color change of the Gewürztraminer that it's ripe. You know, it's something we didn't quite see in 2020. You could just notice the slight unripe color on the skins. So something that we'll be looking for in the future, just to make sure that we get it right. But yeah, we're pretty excited with the styles.
Great. And I think that's a nice 1-2 punch to go forward with. So, and I know we want to talk about the wines that that I have in front of me, definitely. But I'm curious about Pinot Noir. I mean, Andrew was talking about Pinot Noir potentially on the coast here. If you had to, in a nutshell, describe, not even if it's not the Pinot Noir that's consistently coming now, but the Pinot Noir that you see for the future in the Kootenays, if you had to pick one or two characteristics that made it unique from something that came out of Kelowna or something, that came out of, mid Okanagan and Naramata or Okanagan Falls, how would you describe it?
I think for us, the acid intensity in the Pinot Noir, I'm always waiting for the acids to kind of drop a little bit when we harvest, and it seems like we're waiting a long time. We can get the bricks up to 26.5, and some of our reserves we've picked that late, and it just gives it a really nice depth. A lot of character, a lot of flavor. Also the aromatics on the Pinot is it's lifted in the nose, and with a nice, smooth tannin finish. They're just coming out to be really, really beautiful wines.
That's great. I think we're going to have to meet mid-season sometime and do an all red tasting, or maybe an all Pinot tasting.
Yeah,
would love it. Okay, I'm going to try to move my head out of the way, and I'm going to maybe let you talk while I taste.
Okay.
About the two wines that I have in front of me and that the media has. I don't know. Do you want to start with the Récolte Blanche?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the Récolte Blanche is a blend of 6 different varieties, 6 white varieties that we have here. Typically dominant varieties are Pinot Gris, Schoenberg, and Gewürztraminer. We also put a little bit of Chardonnay, a little bit of Kerner, and we have a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc as well. So it's an all-around wine. Every year it can be quite different, depending on the season. Each year we seem to have a star wine that comes through, and it just lifts the profile of that wine, of the Récolte Blanche. For 2020, sorry.
I think you're probably going to answer the question I was just about to ask, because you said this really changes year to year. So how does this wine show 2020?
Yeah, so 2020, everything kind of came in slightly under what we'd usually pick it at. That -8 October 25th kind of forced us to pick before that. So I would say the main difference is that we didn't make a Chardonnay in 2020, so it all went into the blend. And then that had quite a prominent acid profile. So we ended up leaving a little bit more residual sugar in this wine. So it's 28 grams residual and a 3.2 pH, whereas it tends to be more like a 3.4, and that's driven by the Schoenberg and the Gewürztraminer. And I find that it really has a nice smooth finish because of that sort of lower acidity in the wines. But this one is just as good. We're seeing really nice aromatics come through, and then we're just trying to balance out that acidity with the sugar.
Well, and it sounds like you're making the wine that the vintage dictates, right? You're looking for balance and interest rather than making it by a recipe, to hit a certain RS and certain percentages of grape varieties. So that's super interesting. All right, and then the rosé is it all Pinot Noir?
Yeah, so it's 100% Pinot Noir. We have 115 and 114 sort of designated for that. The really interesting thing is we've actually 4-caned our 115. It's in a sort of the top end of the block, a little bit more vigorous. We have quite clay soils, and it just grows incredibly. It grows perfectly. The picture actually on the presentation is the 115 at the back there. Yeah, and we do a 3-day skin contact, which tends to be quite a bit longer. I would have actually almost preferred doing a little bit more, just because it was quite a light year. We tend to get that really nice tart finish, and that's what we're going for. I find it helps to balance the sweetness. Starts off slightly sweet and then finishes tart, like sort of cranberry. And it took a little bit longer to get to that profile. I found right after bottling, I was pretty nervous and pretty worried, but it finally kind of came around, and we saw that finish that we were trying to achieve.
It sounds to me like there's a theme here, and you've talked a lot about, even when you were talking generally about the region, and then when you're talking more specifically about the Pinot Noir and even the Gewürztraminer, that certainly the acid profile on the wines, even if it's a blend or single grape variety white or Pinot Noir, it sounds like that's really going to be a defining characteristic and something that sets you apart. And certainly, you know, those of us who have worked in restaurants and focus on food and wine pairing, etc., that's such a key thing. So we really look forward to, well, we look forward to coming and seeing you, and also to tasting the reds from 2020 and seeing what happens in the future.
Yeah, we're pretty excited.
Thanks, Wes. And again, I have the questions are piling up, so awesome. Okay, Eckhard.
Okay.
Eckhard Zeidler from way up in Lillooet, and then way down a beautiful dirt road on the end of the planet, making lovely fresh wines. We welcome you.
We call it the land that time forgot.
You seem to be thriving out there anyway. I'm very, very happy to see you and happy to taste the wines. And I know,
let me just say one thing right off the start.
Okay.
If I may. This has been so interesting listening to Andrew and Wes and yourself. And I remember about 5 years ago, there was a panel that was convened, and it was, does BC have a signature grape? Okay, or should BC have a signature grape? Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand and stuff. Pinot Noir, Pinot Noir, Pinot Noir, Pinot Noir. Boy, am I hearing it. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
No, I love it. We can talk about Pinot Noir as much as you like, and I think it's something, especially if we can show regional differences within BC for the Pinot, that is so interesting. And I believe you have some Pinot Noir yourself up there, don't you?
I do indeed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in your, I know that you really, I have some inside information, and I know that you set out to experiment with grape varieties, with styles of wine, even within, you know, sort of a certain set of characteristics. And you really wanted to discover what worked well viticulturally, what made interesting wines, what could be, you know, a real calling card for your winery and for Lillooet. And where are you on that journey, and share your discoveries with us?
Yeah, Barb, that's really at the basis of everything that I've done here. We planted our first vines only 12 years ago, so we're not even in kindergarten yet, knowing how things perform. But we started very, very patiently, long game with, I've trialed 37 different varieties here. And a lot of the varieties that I've trialed are what are known in Europe as Piwi. Piwi is the acronym for Pilzwiderstandfähig. There, I couldn't remember it when you were up there exactly what that word was. It's the International Working Group for the Promotion of Fungus-Resistant Vine Varieties. And I'm very, very interested in disease resistance on vines, both from the genetics of the vine itself and also on the climate. This is one of the reasons why we chose Lillooet. Lillooet's Lytton region being fairly consistently the hot spot in Canada, or the highest extreme high summer temperatures. We'll regularly get into the low to mid 40s here. And once we've achieved 41.5 degrees for 3 hours in the canopy, powdery mildew is done for the season. It's gone. Okay, just put away the sprayer. I've had seasons here where I have not had to spray at all. That stuff really interests me. So you end up getting into grape varieties or trialing them, and some of them I've planted a lot more of that are not particularly well known. I've made a pretty big commitment to Blattner varieties here, and I don't know, Andrew, if you have any on your place, but this is the first hot or hotter, still cold climate viticulture, but it's the first hotter area, and some of those are coming together beautifully. Now, not everybody understands the difference between a cross and a hybrid. Most of these are not hybrids. They're interspecific hybrids. They're crosses in the same way that Cabernet Sauvignon is a cross, right, between Cab Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. Anyway, I could go on all day about this kind of stuff, but it's really yielded some very, very pleasant surprises for us, because I've been always willing, if something is exhibiting a little bit of disease pressure, black spot, anything, it comes out. I'm just not gonna chase that stuff. And I'm probably more interested in actually the plants than I am in the ultimate wine. The wine is what it is, but can we grow good plants there? If I may, unless you had a different question, I'll just talk a little bit about the vintage.
Sure, absolutely. And then maybe if you could be so good as to just, and you've alluded to it a little bit already, just remind us what a normal or what you've experienced so far in climate. Just put 2020 in context for us. That would be great.
That's going to be the punchline here, right? And we had fairly conventional years, but as everybody knows, 2018, 2019, a lot of regions, or if not a region, then the specific sites experienced a mild but very early frost. Right? So we dipped just below freezing, but enough to take the canopy out on October the 3rd in 2018, and I think it was October the 5th in 2019. It was on October the 5th, and then all the grapes come off, and we are making wine like crazy, because we won't leave it hanging out there. It interferes with the plant's ability to harden off properly for the winter. And loved the wine. It was pretty much the style that we had hoped to achieve, which is a little bit austere, very clean, that kind of thing. So 2020, yeah, slow start to the season. But then it came through, everybody caught up. And then we had hang time, right? And we thought, oh, yay, after the last 2 years, we're all bubbly about some hang time here, right? You know, we're really going to take advantage of it. The best analogy I can find for that is, just because you've got a 38 under your pillow doesn't mean you have to shoot someone, right? Just because you've got hang time doesn't mean you should be taking advantage of it. And that is most well represented in the Auxerrois that you have right there. Auxerrois, you let it hang, you've got a little bit of good botrytis on it, no, not the bad botrytis, the good botrytis, which gives it some of that tropical fruit flavors, a little bit of the banana in the background, but we ended up with some unfermentable sugar in it. It's just slightly off dry, but that hasn't happened really here before since we've been growing that. Everything came in riper than we thought. It's funny, when you've got a year that you're having maybe a little bit of a challenge ripening, not a big one, you're out there doing your berry tests, you're getting the Brixes, and then when you pick it and crush it, generally the Brix comes in a little bit lower. 2020, we're checking the pHs. We don't want it to go too high and everything, and keep some of that austere too. And then we pick everything, and then the Brix is coming in higher than what our samples gave us. So this last vintage was a vintage where we were dealing with pretty ripe grapes, and it's been it's been a real interesting learning experience for me here.
The Auxerrois is still very, I know some of you have it and are tasting along. The Auxerrois is still very, very fresh and beautiful. Obviously, there's lots of ripe fruit. There's lots of the floral aromas that you were talking about, but it's very nice. It's very lovely and drinkable wine. And I hope if there's something, because there was, and we love that you're outside in the vineyard. Absolutely. It was getting a little bit windy there at one point. The meadowlark is no problem. She's, just good background. But I just want to say to the audience, if there's something that Eckhard was mentioning and you need him to repeat during the wind gusts, just let us know on the Q&A, and I'll get that information for him. So interesting. And, in a vintage like 2020, where you had this hang time, and I think I already know the answer to this, but you know, you have people that make the trip out to see you. What do you tell them nicely when they're asking for a big oaky red?
The only oak that I use at Cliff and Gorge is down just outside the winery. There's a little spot where we can taste, and we do that on top of the barrel. Beyond that, I don't oak wines whatsoever here. Lillooet is a completely new region. Both us and our neighbors here, Fort Barons, we planted the same year or the same week in 2019. And I decided, because people make a bit of a journey to get here, as you know, that they deserve to taste the pure grape, okay, just the grape juice. I think people are probably more interested in the site and the climate. They're more interested in that than my skill as a purchaser of Saison Moreau barrels of various toast levels and things like that. So I don't oak any of the reds whatsoever. That said, I have a Cabernet Franc that really came in nicely. Pinot Noir came in much bigger wine this year than I would have expected. Quite a big Pinot Noir, and we are one of the few people that just loves and actually planted in the beginning Marshall Foch, and all of those I would recommend for a big red, but I wouldn't recommend it as a big oaky red.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Let's talk about the rosé that some people have. So fill us in.
Rosé, well, we just bottled it the other day, and we thought, man, let's just give it one more filter for a sparkle. And the color just came out like fluorescent. So it's quite ridiculous what it looks like. But that is a blend. It's a peasant. I call it peasant wine. Whenever I call something peasant wine around here, it means that it is a blend, so it's not a purpose-built rosé method or something like that. It is a combination of Gamay Noir, Petit Verdot, or pardon me, not Petit Verdot, Meunier, and the base for it is one of the Blattner crosses that we have. With a charming name of 50.25.07. And it just works perfectly on this kind of thing. It's as a background, it's got just a bit enough richness to it, and that acidity that you would expect from in a rosé. The way it's a little bit bigger than I'd hoped for. The way that I like to describe my rosé in a year where we get it in a little bit earlier is that I'm hoping that your palate and your mouth taste cleaner after you had your first glass of it than before you started. And that's the whole idea with that rosé.
Lovely. So you need another sip. Well, thank you, Eckhard. I see the, let's delve into the question and answer box and see what we've got. And I also want to remind the winemakers, if you have a question for your fellow panelists, absolutely go for it. Okay. Okay, I might need some clarification. Okay, Sid, like the vibrant color with fresh low alcohol at 11.5, what is the residual sugar? I think this is in reference to the Pinot Noir Rosé from Singletree. So Andrew, what's the residual sugar in the rosé? And you've got,
there we
perfect.
go. I'll unmute myself. The residual sugar in the rosé is 14 grams per liter.
Okay, 14 grams. And Wes, what about in yours?
12.9 grams.
12.9, okay, pretty similar. And Eckhard?
I don't know. I don't have it in front of me. Sorry, Barb.
No, that's fair enough. I think all of the tech sheets are on the app too, if you're really curious. Okay, here's a question from TDM. The Cowichan has long been in discussion about their labels reflecting what is grown in the valley and what's sourced from the Okanagan. Discussion, yes, but we don't always see it on the label. What is the situation in your region about truth and labeling, etc.? And let's direct this one to Andrew. I think it's probably the most relevant.
I guess it is for the island side of things. I'm just rereading it again here. Not quite sure. Wait, they're discussing the label reflecting what is grown in the valley. I know on the island they have quite a few hybrids and Blattner varieties as well, because it's a fairly similar growing region to the Fraser Valley. And with labeling, the truth in labeling on the Fraser Valley side, it is if I make a blend between an Okanagan with some Okanagan juice and Fraser Valley juice, then we put that on the label as a BC VQA wine. It's not it's not put in as a Fraser Valley. So I think all winemakers were very truthful in what is on the label is what is actually in the bottle.
Certainly, if I see BC VQA and it's one of your wines, I absolutely infer that it's a blend from both regions. So, and that's good. And then I see one that says Fraser Valley and I get really excited. Here's another one for you, Andrew, from Tim Pazzi. Considering the grape variety Albarino, or is it too cool to ripen? Have you thought about it?
I haven't thought about it. I know a neighbor down the road, the Fraser Valley is actually growing quite a bit, and actually right in my backyard here, we have 3 wineries within a kilometer of each other, and we have another 2 that should be opening up in the next year or 2. And I know my neighbor at Mount Lehman Winery, I believe he has some Albarino, but I haven't considered it yet. But we do have about 15 acres of plantable land still left on the property, so it may be in the future.
Well, and it should be something that doesn't mind a little bit of humidity, one would think, given where its home is, and certainly a popular grape, something that's really growing in popularity. Absolutely, that would be cool to see. A question for Wes from Tim Pazzi. Drove through last year, such a beautiful spot. Wondering how many wineries are now coming on stream. So if we can get the insider's quick update on that.
Well, there's 5 wineries. The newest one was Redbird, and we're all sitting pretty small, but there's not a whole lot else happening. People are still buying up land and putting in cherries at the moment, so we haven't quite seen that switch like the Okanagan saw. But hopefully soon, eventually, we'll start seeing it. I've been doing a little bit of contract winemaking, and I'd like to do a lot more. So
yeah. Cool. And there's something romantic in my mind about cherry orchards and vineyards of Pinot Noir too. I don't know. There's something, there could be a good marriage in those two.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of cherry coming through in our Pinot. So
I don't doubt it. From TDM again to Eckhard. Your neighbor is Fort Barons. Neighbors a lot. Yes, in the same appellation, yes. What were you able to learn about their growing history and varietal success that became helpful for you at Cliff and Gorge? I know you've both sort of come along at the same speed, but you clearly would watch what each other is doing. So what's helped you?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a good one. We started out on pretty much completely different planets at the beginning, and that is the Fort Barons knew quite clearly what they wanted their their offerings to be. I went in and we got all our vineyard infrastructure and everything else. I had no idea what I was going to end up with in 10 years. So there are a few things that they are growing that we're growing here also. They seem to be a little bit warmer over there. So they've even made a commitment to they've planted Cab Sauv over there. I can't ripen Cab Sauv consistently here. Okay, I'm at a slight. I'm only about 100 feet higher, but they've seem to have a little bit of a warmer microclimate over there. But beyond that, we went in entirely different directions. Like I realize that a lot of people are a little bit shy about the word hybrid and things like that, and that's certainly not everything we've got. I mean, I grow large blocks of Auxerrois, Cab Franc, Pinot Noir, and that kind of thing, but we've put all that other stuff in there. So we're very, very different places.
Fair enough, and great to celebrate the diversity. And it's just interesting, you know, when you're at the limit of grape growing, that, you know, how you say you're 100 meters higher than
about that, yeah.
About that, then that could make a significant difference. There's also a question, Eckhard, about your background here.
Yeah.
Where did you come from?
Where did I come from? Oh my gosh. I came originally from Vancouver. I was an investment banker for 25 years and lived around the world in different operations. And when I was living in Germany, I spent a tremendous amount of time in the Alsace. Okay, pretty much every weekend was in the Alsace. That's where I absolutely caught the wine bug, is when I saw this, looked down the vineyard row and saw this 80-year-old guy down there tending his vines. And I just looked at that. And I was only like 30 or 31 at the time. And I just looked at this guy and thought, that looks good to me. You know, I'd like to be him. Anyway, caught the bug, did that career around the world, ended up raising our family in Whistler. And I have property on Salt Spring Island. And I tried for about 10 years growing grapes over there, and on a 1 acre experimental parcel. And that's where I developed my disdain for powdery mildew and for diseases. Okay, just way too many chemical inputs. And while we were in Whistler, we used to roll through Lillooet fairly often on our way up into the Caribou. We had a little cabin up there. And the kids are all screaming in the car because it's so hot, and we've come over the mountain pass of the Duffy Lake Road, and they're ready to throw up, and everybody hated Lillooet, just because it is so unpleasant. But I just kept looking at it, and then discovered a patch of grapes here that's now this year 50 years old.
Wow.
And just made the most exquisite wine that belonged to Crystal Rochard, the former mayor. And I made the decision in like 1 minute that we're coming to roll that, and glad I did.
Fabulous. Also, for you, Eckhard, and I'll combine a couple of questions here. One from Barb Wild is, what other hybrids are succeeding at Cliff and Gorge? And of the trials, asks Tim Pazzi, which varieties are ultimately proving to be the best, and which one of them are hybrids? Okay,
and I think the word hybrid, I alluded to it earlier, but I really want to go into that again. That there is a difference between a hybrid and a cross. Okay, hybrid is different species, so Vitis vinifera X amarensis or rupestris and that kind of thing. A cross is vinifera X vinifera, and a number of the crosses that I'm working with, I am told by Valentine Blattner that they are crosses and not hybrids. I do have hybrids here also, but the ones that are working well is one that's growing Vancouver Island quite a bit. La Belle is making beautiful wines. I've got a bunch of numbered ones. Okay, Petit Milo is a big grape for us, and Petit Milo is getting to be more well known. But what's so interesting about it is to try some Petit Milo from the island, from the Gulf Islands, from the Fraser Valley and it's growing in all those places, and then put it up against ours, and it's a different wine. I hope I'm answering the question. In the case of crosses / hybrids that I'm doing, it's almost exclusively Blattner varieties at this point for the disease resistance.
Cool. And a general question from Michael Lamb saying, are winemakers in BC allowed to, when in the process of winemaking, are they allowed to add things like add or strip acid, reverse osmosis, chaptalization, etc.? In my general sense, I can say that yes, within restrictions. But Andrew, you had an answer. You wanted to develop that.
We do. We are, like you say, allowed to do chaptalization, reverse osmosis, adding or stripping acid is all things that we can do. But like you said, there are parameters on some of those as to how much you can and can't do, especially on the chaptalization side. You can only add up to 2 bricks more than what you came in at harvest with. So I think that one, especially with us in the Fraser Valley, when sometimes things don't come in as ripe as you want it, and Mother Nature forces you to harvest, it's one of the reasons why you may be seeing a little bit of those lower alcohol wines for the 2020 vintage as well.
Great. And Wes, what would you say in answer to the question?
Yeah, you're totally allowed to change it. We do a little bit of acid adjustment before ferments. Typically, if it doesn't come in at the right levels and somewhere that we want it to be, making the Pinots get to a certain pH after malolactic, we'll slightly adjust it if we have to.
And would you say that most of these additions or sometimes subtractions are they done for wine stability or wine style?
I think mostly wine style. We do finishing as well. So if it's slightly out and we think it needs a gram here or there, just to adjust the palate, yeah, we'll definitely add it and just make sure that it runs across your palate nice and smooth.
Well, we appreciate that. And thank you as always, panelists, for your frankness. And, we are curious about these questions, so we appreciate it. And Sid is asking Eckhard about Cabernet Franc, which I think you already mentioned that you're excited about some Cabernet Franc coming online. Fort Barron certainly makes a delicious example. Is there anything you wanted to add about Cabernet Franc?
The Cabernet Franc that we get here, we've got everything's in line, the pHs, the sugars, but this is kind of a cliche, but it holds on to some acidity, and it's extremely pleasant. It's got everything going on that I would expect in the Cabernet Franc and the spiciness and so on, but then it's still a refreshing white wine, and that's just the style that I like.
Lovely. And a question from Sid about the botrytis, because I know probably many of us were surprised when you talked about it in terms of the Auxerrois, and then you made an essentially dry wine from it. Are there any opportunities in years, maybe even years that echo the pattern of 2020, where you have a later season? Is there an opportunity for an Alsace style like Vendange Tardive or Sélection de Grenoble?
Absolutely, and it scares the willies out of me, Barb. Absolutely.
Well, you said you hated. I mean,
oh,
you've got this fear of botrytis, essentially, but a good botrytis.
My favorite, or not my favorite wine in the world, but the wine that impressed me the most was one from Olivier Zindhumbrecht, which was a Zindhumbrecht Clos Rangé Gewürztraminer Vendange Tardive. It was an unbelievable revelation, right? And I just went, wow, this is now this is something to work towards. It has taken me a few years to figure out that I'm not in the Alsace here. Okay, I'm simply not. Despite my best efforts to convince myself otherwise, that we're not in the Alsace. But in answer to the question, yes, absolutely. This is one of the first years where we let it go just a little bit, and it ended up in the glass with the tiny bit of residual sugar, but you can sense that botrytis thing coming on. This year, if I get similar conditions, and botrytis doesn't always show up, right? It's got its own little lifespan. I will definitely take some and see if we can go in that direction with it.
Great. We'll look forward to that if circumstances allow. And I think a very appropriate question to look to the future and end up our seminar today to all three of you. Are you expecting tourists to come back this summer? From what I mean, obviously none of us know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but from what you know, from what you've been hearing, let's go one by one. Andrew, are you gearing up for a lot of people, trade and consumers, to come and see you this summer?
Yeah, we are definitely at our Fraser Valley location. With the travel restrictions, we are seeing quite a large amount of people coming out to the winery right now. It definitely goes region by region. Our Naramata location is currently closed because there aren't the tourists coming up to the Okanagan region, and with so many people or so many wineries in that area, we decided just to focus on the Fraser Valley and until those restrictions are lifted. So if the restrictions lift, I definitely will am expecting a return of wine fans to both locations. But I don't have a crystal ball, so we just kind of play it day by day and roll with what we have.
Fair enough. And what about for you, Wes?
We're definitely seeing a lot of local tourism, and that's something that we saw last year. And we were busier than ever. We were lucked out because we have lots of space here at the winery. So, everyone was 6 feet and moved around, and we had to get extra staff. So yeah, we're hoping for another year like that. Seeing all the Kootenay tourism coming out to check out what they have at home, is really amazing.
Great. And Eckhard, for you, are you going to be offering picnics this summer again?
You have to bring your own picnic, but like the experience that you would have had last year, we didn't know what was going to go on, right? So I just presented 3 wines, and that was in a little pack out in our picnic area. People do basically it's a do-it-yourself tasting. I'll sit down a little distance away and talk to them, but the picnic area is gorgeous. We did the 3 wines. That was such a success, and people appreciated it so much. This year we've done all the 6 wines that we're presenting in half bottles in a pack. That's a little $70 package in your glasses and some extra things, yams, tomatoes if they're around. I'm expecting very, very also expecting the wind to come in.
Well, I think I have a feeling, and I don't have a crystal ball either, but I think it is going to be busy. I think people are at once, they want to travel, but they also have a deep-seated desire to support BC and support local. So we look forward to seeing everybody in person this summer. And thank you so much to the panelists for joining us, and thank you to the media and Wine Growers BC, and thanks for the awesome insight to your wine regions. Okay, see everybody soon.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you, panelists. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone, for joining us.